Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us tonight. Our guest this evening is MaryBeth Elhardt. MaryBeth, take it away.
Osio, Teheo, Casteo, Agalani, Onnagoshiganangiikwe, Chichalagi, Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Dawado. Hi, everybody. This is MaryBeth Elhardt. My spirit name is Onnagoshiganangiikwe, which means evening star woman. I said, hello, how are you, my friends? I gave you my spirit name, and I told you that my people are from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and so am I. I'm a non-MIEA, which is the Cherokees that live in Oklahoma and made the Trail of Tears. I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'm happy to share my story.
Thanks, MaryBeth. Well, let's get right into it. So where your people are from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, but where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. My mother was living in Oklahoma, and during the war, my father was working in a USO camp, and he was a airline mechanic. And my grandmother was working in the USO, helping with the soldiers' needs and serving food and things like that. And she pretty much fell in love with my dad and his personality. And so she insisted that he meet his daughter. Well, my father was from Minneapolis, and my mom was from Oklahoma. And as things worked out, they got married and we settled here in Minnesota. I was born in Bloomington in 1956. I attended Brooklyn Junior High School, Crestview Elementary, and Osseo Middle School, and I graduated from Osseo High School. I attended college at Northview Community College and did several different jobs. Never expected up in Indian education.
I bet.
I was working as a para for Champlain Park High School because I wanted to start working closer to home. And at that time, it was kind of hard to break into jobs. And I had applied, and the job that I was working at, there were a lot of lies being told. And so when I had an opportunity to get out of there and go work for Champlain Park, I did. My first 4 years, I was a special ed paraprofessional working with a paraplegic young man. And after graduating him from Champlain Park, I also got him into college at Dunwoody, and I believe that he's been living quite a very good life. Well, during that summer, my last summer, there was a workshop that the paraprofessionals needed to take over at the ESC. And we had a break, and I was wandering around, and I found a job board. And on that board, I saw a position for Indian education. And I had no idea that our school district even had Indian education. Even during the 4 years that I worked at Champlain Park, I had no idea. Well, I was very excited about that. So I did apply, and the school district drug its feet. We really did not find out. I actually had to call and hound the principal or the superintendent's secretary. And the weekend before school started, we were all told who was hired. And I was hired at that time.
And
so began my journey in education.
And how long ago was that, MaryBeth?
At the end of this last year, I've put in 20 years in Indian education. I put in 4 years as a paraprofessional, and I also worked part-time for a year as a bus paraprofessional. So 20 years in Indian education and 25 years in education total.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's been, I'm sure you've touched a lot of lives in your tenure here in Anoka-Hennepin.
Well, I feel that I've been very fortunate. I am a people person, and young people make me laugh. Every single day of those 20 years, if I was around students, I was laughing. I really found my niche when I did enter Indian education, and I put the students first always. It didn't matter what was happening between staff or in the office, or if there were bumpy roads ahead. All of the advisors made sure that the students never had to go through any of those things. We worked strictly to help our students and to make sure that they advanced in their education and their culture. At that time, we had 4 Indian education advisors, 2 cultural teachers, a secretary, and we went from there. So when I first began in Indian education, I was only teaching education. I had nothing to do with culture at the time.
Interesting. So what would you say has been the most rewarding part of being an advisor with the Indian Education Program?
Well, for me, it's I've had the Champlain cluster, so I've basically had many students that may have never even seen their reservations. And to teach them about their culture, to give them a basic understanding of what I had learned about the Anishinaabe and the Dakota Lakota cultures. I could help them in that way. I was always very strong about education because Cherokees are one of the 5 civilized tribes, and that's something that was very heavily happening in my family all through my lifetime. So we always look for college scholarships, and my idea was if there was free money out there for students to receive for further education, why shouldn't it be my students? So we went after any scholarships that we could possibly get. I always insisted on higher learning after high school, whether that be a 6 or 8-month certificate, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, a master's degree, dental assistant, whatever the student wanted to do, just as long as they got more education up and above high school. I wrote 4 GATE scholarships and was fortunate that my students were brilliant and 3 of them received them. I have 1 student that right now is going for his PhD. I have another student that I'm proud to say was hired in Indian education last year. And my 3rd GATE scholar is an investment, he's not an investment banker, but he's an investment real estate, I believe. I've written PepsiCo scholarship, Horace Ratio, Augsburg Presidential Scholarship, 2 Ethel Currys, WCCO channel, WCCO channel 4. I had 2 students that did internship. I also had 3 students that were accepted on the Washington, D.C. trip. and went to Washington, D.C. and learned about politics and government and how they could not manipulate, but how they could navigate those systems if they chose to go into that type of degree.
Wow.
So I think that I've helped advance the education in as many students as I possibly could. But again, those scholarships had really nothing to do with me other than having fabulous students with the capacity to do what they needed to do to further their education.
So you mentioned the Gates Scholarship a couple of times. What's significant about the Gates Scholarship?
Well, the Gates Scholarship is a scholarship that when received, the student can have a full ride all the way to their PhD in any college in the world that they're accepted in. Their books are paid for, they get gas stipend, they get food stipend. I believe their housing is taken care of. They pay for nothing for their educational needs. At the time the scholarship first came out, they were allowed to take 2 to 3 years off in between because the scholarship realizes that as students get older, relationships can start, children can start. And so there was always time in there that they could take breaks and then go back to their scholarship. It was a scholarship that many of the students that received were from lower income levels and would never been able to afford the college experience that it brought them.
That's awesome. Thank you. So in those 25 years or 20 years with the program, in your opinion, what's been the most challenging part of the job?
The most challenging part of this position was the change in our upper management. We had at one time, I had gone through over 21 supervisors in 18 years or 16 years. I'd have to consult with a previous advisor to get that time frame completely straight. But it was very chaotic. We never knew if the person that was having us do something would be there the following year or through the end of the year. And it seems that every new person that came on board always wants to make their mark. So we had to be prepared for changing constantly. That was the most unsettling part. We did settle in for 4 years with a woman named Lynn Montgomery, and she did great things for us. And then fortunately, I was able to finally settle in and get my last 9 years with Todd Protovinsky.
We all know and love Todd.
Yes, we do.
How have maybe you've already addressed this, but if there's anything you'd want to add to how have you seen the program change over the years?
Oh my, the program has dramatically changed. It's gone from the first year that I started when we had our senior honoring, it was a total potluck. So the families of the seniors were bringing food, staff was preparing food. There was no money that we were able to put out for it. We started scraping by because our secretary at the time, who later became an advisor, had lots of connections. And so she wheeled and dealed, and we were able to finally secure some blankets. And she had a friend that would engrave them so that we could put the kid's name in high school in the corner. But other than that, we worked on very little money. We did get a pretty good stipend each year so that we could buy snacks for our students. And each advisor got, I believe it was $800 to use in staff developments of their choosing. We, back at that time, had elementary, middle school, and high school. So our students, we had quite a synergy and that sweet flow. So many of my students, even this year, that are graduating, I've had since elementary school. I think that's a really good way to run a program because the kids get to really know you and they know what they can get away with and what they can't. And we know what they'll try to get away with and won't.
If you had one wish, MaryBeth, what would your wish for this program be?
That it continue the way that it's going. But we all know that we can't do that. People change, jobs change, society changes. I would like to see the program continue on with pushing education, with bringing as much culture to our younger people as we can. What I always tried to do when I was an advisor is I taught culture heavy in elementary school. Those kids are like sponges and that's all they want. Whatever you say, they listen, they learn. That's the biggest time for their learning spurts. And they really picked up and understood their culture and they had a want to know about it. As I got older into middle school, I gave them culture, but less culture than elementary. They become so much more center-based in middle school that it's more about how they look and which friends they hang with than it is really about their culture. Some of them are still in middle school dancing, excuse me, but usually what happens is the older they get, the further away they get from their dancing. And I always remind them that one day they should keep that skill up. Excuse me, because what I've always seen happen is later as students get older and they get married and they have their own children, their children one day will want to know and their children will ask and they'll want to know what it was like for their mom and dad. And that is usually when the parents go back to dancing. So I was harder on middle school with grades because I wanted to prepare them. I knew it was coming once they got to high school. And when they got to high school, I tried to fulfill any cultural needs that they asked for. I worked heavily with grandfather's 7 teachings because that's how I was raised. I was raised that if you live by those teachings, you will be a good person, you will be a well-rounded and a loving person. And so that is something that daily I continue to strive to keep up. We're human, so it's easy to slip away. But in high school is when I began to prepare them for what would come later, whether that would be college or certificate programs, figuring out where their passions lie, trying to get them on the path of taking the classes that would help them towards their majors or towards any of the passions that they had that they'd like to go for in college. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what are your plans or goals now that you're retired?
Well, I still have a toe in Indian education in many ways, and I'm sure I always will. A lot of my previous students still will text or call about questions, and I try to redirect them back to Bradley, and they all like Bradley Knote, the new gentleman that was hired in my position. And I feel that they're very fortunate, and I'm very fortunate that such a great guy was hired to replace me. But I've been on the Minnesota Indian Education Board of Directors for the past 18 years. And last year I was voted on as a lifetime member. So I'll always be helping out at the conferences, and I will be a part of that. I'm always around when to advise any advisors that have questions or families. I just received a wedding invitation in the mail for one of my young men that graduated. Thinking he graduated 7 to 8 years ago. So they never really leave your life. Your families, because of the connections you make with them and the connections you make with their children, are usually, you'll have quite a few that consider you family as well.
I've often been told that our job is about relationships first and foremost, and it sounds from
Absolutely.
your experience that that's exactly right.
That's absolutely true. And it has a lot to do with not only the relationships that you build with your students, but the important relationships that you build with their parents as well. Um, I think one thing that's always helped me in this job is that I have never forgotten what my feelings were when I was a high school student. I remember the hurt. It was real and it was deep. And the breakups with boyfriends and the feeling of new love and the feeling of bullying girls and all of those things. So students don't have power. Everyone has power over them, their parents, their teachers, their advisors, and they really don't have much power. When you think about the power they have, it's used in ways that aren't good, but at least they're able to flex some of it. That would be in ways of skipping school, staying home, not turning in an assignment for a teacher that just flat out refuses to help you and says, go to your study partners or read the book. Um, they have ways that they try to rebel out. But so what I've always done is I've tried to give my students some power. And one example I can give is IEP meetings, individual educational plans. I can't tell you how many IEPs I've been in with a room full of people and the student that's being evaluated sit next to me and have the whole room full of people talk to everyone but the student. They talk as though the student's not there, that they're invisible. And I always correct that because this is that student's educational plan and they should have a say in it. So when they're asking me a question about, well, what do you think so and so would like for that? I say, excuse me? They're right here next to me. Why don't you ask them? And that's the way that I got my students involved so that their voices began being heard and not just the teachers and the parents. Because let's face it, we all have had our education. This is theirs, and they should be able to have a say in it. So I always tried to do things like that. I listened. I made sure that I listened. Whether it was silly talk about girlfriends or talk about family or hurts over girlfriends or possibly family hurts or just things that they wanted to say. And I made notes so that I remembered. And so when I came back to see my students, or maybe months down the road, or maybe a couple of years later, I might ask, well, how's grandma doing? Did she come out okay? Did she get through that rough period? And is she back home? And I remember, I remember that girl, Susan. How is Susan doing? Is she still in your life? And when you recall things like that and you use that type of language with your students, it's important because they know that you're really listening and that you care. And in so many conversations with people, later on they can say, well, I'm sorry, what did you say? Because they're not really listening. They're there, they're present, their ears are open, but they're not truly listening to what the person has to say. And I have found with kids that's important. Truth is important, and listening.
Agreed. So can we circle back to your personal journey, Mary Beth?
Sure.
Okay.
I retired this year on December 3rd. And since then, I have had a blast. I've been working on sewing projects. I sewed a lot of Christmas presents this year. I feel sorry for some of my friends that got the first gifts, but they're getting better. So if any of your seams are popping, hey, mark it up to a brand new sewer. I've been painting, which is a passion of mine. I've been able to go out and see my pony a lot more. And I really love the Yucatan down in Mexico. I've traveled there for over 40 years. And so I took a month off and went down there for a month and enjoyed myself there. But all through, even vacation, I was still getting texts. MaryBeth, can you help me get a spirit name? MaryBeth, do you know where I can get a jingle dress? MaryBeth, I can't remember the new guy's name. MaryBeth, what do I do about this grade? MaryBeth, MaryBeth, miss you, MaryBeth. Are you still alive? So yeah, it's ongoing, and I expect it to be, and I can't say that I don't love it.
Absolutely. So I'm interested. How has being Native influenced your life or your experience as a young person?
Well, I've always known I was Native, and I guess in the beginning when I was younger, it was more of a fight with my brothers because that was an identity that they hadn't decided to choose yet. They didn't identify with being Cherokee, although they knew they were. So there was a lot of taunting and teasing and things like that when I was little because, oh, MaryBeth the Indian and nobody else is. But in reality, now they, as I got older, they grew out of the nasty boy syndrome. And we've all been searching as much as we can, my entire family, cousins and things. There's things that we're always trying to find. When my mom was alive, she spent a number of weeks down at the reservation going through the libraries. And we are enrolled members of the Cherokee Nation. For Christmas one year, I had my entire family's name engraved in the National Wall in the National Museum in Washington, D.C. So if you ever get out there, you will see our names chiseled in the wall. And I always tried to learn as much as I could when I was younger. However, my grandmother attended Carlisle boarding school. So she gave us very little. She taught us a little bit of our introduction. And my grandmother did not talk about her experiences with us. When she got older, she talked more about what took place in the boarding school with my mom, but she never shared any of those things with me. And when I was younger, it was kind of hard to figure out because I had one grandmother that wanted me to crawl up on her lap and she would read me the Bible. And my Cherokee grandmother was never the type of person that wanted me to crawl up on her lap. She was a little more military. She'd come and stay with us for 3 months to help my mom out when my mom went back to college and when my mom was teaching second grade. And my grandmother and I hit heads a lot. You know, we didn't understand each other. So it wasn't until I really began in Indian education and started studying boarding schools and other tribes that I started to understand who my grandmother was. And I understood why she was the way she was. Because Carlisle was run by Pratt, and Pratt was a military guy. So that entire school was run as a military academy. I did get some pictures from my mother. My mom and my grandmother went back to Carlisle, but there had been a fire, and so the school had been burned down, and most of the records had been lost. But she was able to get some pictures out of a yearbook, I believe it was from, something like that. And they had all the Native children dressed up as important white presidents and notary white people. I remember my grandmother was dressed as a Statue of Liberty. And then they had the girls doing different ballet dances. And it was really kind of weird because they had all of them in the same kind of wig. And it just looked really bizarre. But my grandmother survived. She got through boarding school, went on, became a fantastic businesswoman, very, very successful. And I'm fortunate that I was able to find out what I did and learn about my native bloodline from her and get that from her. My cousins and I and my brothers now often talk on Facebook, trying to figure out different things. And my older cousins that are retired have taken their trips to the reservation to see what they could find. We're searching very hard for our clan. But of course, back then, the Native people would come in for their commodities, especially the Cherokee. They really didn't want much to do with anything after that long walk, that Trail of Tears, and that was something that's still passed down in generation after generation. So they would basically come in, make their signature, and get their commodities and leave. So the records are very, very poor. I did have a cousin that got a scholarship, and what he did is he took 2 summers and went down and worked in the library, helping with records and things to help pay back his scholarship. Because he wanted to make sure that that money also was used for another student. But again, like I said before, I really found my niche when I got into Indian education, and I knew nothing about Anishinaabe or Dakota people, very little, at least about the Dakota people. I had seen dances with wolves, so I had heard a little bit of the language. But through workshops and studying and things, I became very educated in the Anishinaabe way of life and the Dakota way of life. I've taken a lot of language classes. I know bits and pieces of different languages. It seems that I understand them a lot more than I can speak them. But and that's where I got the knowledge to give to my children.
What is something that has inspired you in your life?
Oh, well, most definitely my mother and my father. They were the biggest inspiration in everything that I did. My father taught me the love of the wilderness and taught me how to hunt, how to fish. He put us all through gun safety training. He taught us life-saving skills if we were to get turned around in the woods. I learned so many things from him. And then, of course, from my mother, I was taught my values and how to turn a cheek and how to be a good person. She taught me that I should never say you're my best friend, because you may have other people that are close to you that think they're your best friend. And you don't need to have a best friend. You can have as many friends as you want. So I've learned everything from those two people about my life experiences. I've shared my life tragedies with them. They always stood by us. My mother had told my father that if they had children, she really wanted them to be able to dream. And she made him promise that that's how it would be. And she did that. My brother always wanted to be a pilot. He's a pilot. My older brother always wanted to be an electrical engineer. He's an electrical engineer. I've always wanted to take my native studies and follow my native path, and I have. She encouraged me to marry the man I did, who I dated all through high school. She encouraged me when I got older to buy horses if I wanted them because they were my passion. Um, she volunteered so many hours at Indian Education. It's unbelievable. She would come to regalia making because she wanted to make sure that those little people were proud of their regalia when they were out there dancing. Um, she came to every potluck and she helped out whenever she could. Um, she supported me. She listened when I needed to get things off my chest. And they both always stood by us. So those are my biggest inspiration in my life, most definitely. Always will be.
That's lovely. Um, I think we've established that it wasn't your always your plan to be in this position. If you had never stumbled upon this, where do you see where do you think you would be today? What would you have been doing?
Boy, that's kind of hard. Indian education was one of the first positions I had that it was almost the only one. For about 10 to 15 years while working in India, well, maybe more like 10 years working in Indian education. I also worked weekends for the Minnesota Vikings because I had a part-time job with the Gophers, Vikings, and Twins for 27 years. So I've never really only had one job. But my husband started getting tired of always getting drugged at two jobs or three jobs. And so, he really kind of wanted to retire out of the Vikings. And after that, then I just poured all my energy into Indian education or do some project power work, which is for special needs kids through the district. And I did that probably 3 or 4 years part-time. But it's very hard to know where I would go because what I was trying to get at is that I usually work 2 to 3 jobs. It's better if I'm moving around. I've kind of got two speeds, I've got warp speed and comatose. And because of that, I kind of use up my energy quick. So comatose comes early. In fact, I got to go now. No, I got 15 minutes. Don't
TikTok, Jill. What advice would you give young people today?
Well, again, I think I've been giving them this advice for the last 20 years. Get your education. Live by grandfather's teachings. Love everyone. Don't hate. I've always taught them that, just like I was taught, you don't hate. You can dislike, you cannot agree, you can dislike very, very highly much, but you never hate. And so I feel that if they go for more education, they'll make more money, they'll be happier, they'll live a better life. I want them to look for their passion because it's your passion that works. If you end up in a job that you're passionate about, the end of the day rolls around and you're like, what? Where did that time go? That's how it pretty much was for me in Indian education. In the later years, as I got older and more things got added to our plate, it got to be a little more stressful, but that's how life is. You have stresses, you have good times, you have bad times. You have to be able to circumnavigate them all and pick yourself up, go back at it. If you get thrown from the pony, you don't quit riding. You get back up again, dust off your knees, and take a step forward. So that's what I'd like to tell them is be kind, be loving, follow those guidance that have been laid down before by our 7 grandfathers, which every tribe has. They may vary a little in what they are, but they're basically the same, and to get their education.
Very good. So all these ups and downs, how do you take care of yourself during ups and downs?
Oh, I guess the best person to ask that question is my husband. That's what I found out. Because during the rough times in Indian education, he seems to be the one that heard the most about it. And so it seemed like after Todd came on board and things calmed down and became quiet and the program began taking steps forward to a good place, he wasn't hearing as much about Indian education. And one day we were at a bonfire at my neighbor's house, and my neighbor asked me, "How's Indian education going, MaryBeth?" And I said, "Ask Mark." Mark said, "It's going great. I haven't heard a word." So he was, I don't want to call him my whipping post, but he was the one that heard all the complaining and the hurt when there were problems. And in the beginning years, there were years that I didn't think I was going to be able to make it. And, I would talk about maybe looking for another position. And he would always remind me that I would be very crazy if I did that because I was so happy in my position that it was just a rough time, that I'd get through it. And he was always right.
Nice.
Because this position was about nothing other than those students. I put them first every single day. And that's how this job should be, that the students are first. This is about their education, not about the struggles that the adults have, not about anything else, but furthering them as human beings.
One last question, MaryBeth. What does being Native mean to you?
I've been thinking about this, and that's really a hard question to think about because being Native is, well, it's all encompassing, I guess. That's what it is for me. If you would ask me what is being Native, I would say I'm Native. I don't know how to answer what being Native is because this is what I've always been. So being Native is something that's important. It's something that I hold on to dearly. It's something that connects me to my family, to my relatives, to the people who made that trail of tears. It actually connects me to all Native people because I believe we're all in that web anyways. So being Native is me.
Very well said. That's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you want to add that we didn't touch on?
All I can add is that Indian education was a fantastic time in my life. There are experiences and things that took place with my students and without my students, workshops, conferences, connections with the staff that I worked with, the laughter, the enjoyment. It was the best. It was the very best. And I'm grateful.
Excellent. We have a few minutes. If anybody in our audience has any questions for MaryBeth or comments?
Raise your hand.
Heck yeah, I got a question. Bet you didn't
Hi,
even know
Mr.
I
Brad.
was here, huh?
I saw you come out.
Been being a little incognito today. Yeah, I had a question, I guess. I remember when I was a student in the program. For those of you who may or may not watch this, I had a woman named Kathy Eisenchenk as my advisor, and I remember during the many years that I knew her, and even today, I'd unload so much on her. All the things that were going wrong at home, all the bad grades I was having. And I think a big part of this job, being an advisor, is kind of navigating through a lot of pain, and not just being an advisor, but I think in some ways being Native is traversing through a sort of pain, whether that's an inherited pain or the pain of turning on the news and seeing that 215 little bodies were just discovered at a residential school. We have an interesting
Right.
pain. But so I'm sure that through your years, as an individual as well as an advisor, that you've had your fair share of dealing with this sort of individualistic pain. But I also like to think that you've seen a lot of healing as well. You've lived through the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. You've lived through ICWA being passed. You've lived through sovereignty being more and more respected. So you've seen a lot of healing as well, I'm sure. And what my question is where would you like to see Native people 7 generations from today?
Well, I'd like to see Native people 7 generations from today be able to get along, because what I've noticed in my 20 years working with Indian education, and believe me, we have 11 reservations in this state, and you would think that we have a lot of natives, but Native country is very small. And Native brown people have a lot of problems with the outside world, but truly, Native against Native is the worst. So, what I'd like to see our 7th generation from now be able to actually live by those teachings and reach those goals, so that, I've seen pictures of dogs with cats and ponies with cats and dogs with giraffes and rabbits with deer. And I don't understand why, if all of our nature can get along, why can't all the colors of our people? And maybe I was always out a little bit on Indian education for all, but maybe that's exactly what we need. Because if everyone understood, maybe that would get rid of more of this hate. But for me, I'd like to see the 7th generation live in peace and harmony, and have a wonderful place to live like I've had. Mother Earth is bomb, and I don't think going to Mars is going to be. So I'm hoping that, that generation can do better than this generation has. Does that answer your question? Good. Anyone else? Sarah, your emoji picture has its hand up.
Yeah, I know it always. It's waving high. It's not up, it's waving high.
You need a in there, girlfriend. Well, again, I really enjoyed my time in Indian education. I've enjoyed my my moments with you this evening, and I'm always around. And for the other advisors, I just want you to know, expect to get invited to graduations, weddings, baby showers. I've even been a maid of honor. So you never know. But I can tell you that I've had students call me first when they got their driver's license. And I've had parents say, when it comes to grades, they're more afraid of you than they are of me. But I don't know why, just because I want them, that's all. I never beat them up or anything. And I always made my students food. I figured if their bellies were full, their brains could work better.
Well, one last thought, MaryBeth, is if you have influenced your students in anywhere near the capacity that you've influenced your coworkers and your fellow advisors, it's been a job well done. You're well loved in our Anoka-Hennepin Indian Education community and beyond. And we're very fortunate to have had you working with our kids. And we wish you many wonderful years of retirement.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Back at you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah.